Last night is etched into my memory with the stark clarity of a midwinter's night, sharp, cold, and unervingly precise. It was the kind of night that you'd read about in novels or see in a thriller film where every shadow and every sound holds the weight of a deeper story. I'm an 18-year-old college student, living a pretty normal life up until the moments that unfolded. I suppose I'm writing this down because I need to make sense of it myself, to remember that amidst the tranquility of our everyday lives, there are depths and darknesses we seldom anticipate. My friends and I decided to hang out at my place after spending the earlier part of the evening at Josh's house. It was a routine gathering, nothing out of the ordinary. Josh lives just a few blocks away from me in a suburban neighborhood that's the very definition of tranquil. So when he mentioned we should wrap up by 10:30 p.m., none of us thought much of it. It was a typical Friday night, and I was looking forward to continuing our hangout at my house. There was Alex, driving us back in his beat-up Chevy, Maddie fiddling with the playlist, and Michael, always the quiet one, looking out the window. We arrived at my house and instinctively headed to the backyard. My family has this old fire pit back there, a relic from countless summer barbecues and late-night talks. It's situated near a gate that leads to a side yard where we keep the trash bins. It wasn't trash day, so the gate was usually shut. But tonight, it stood strangely ajar. I remember pausing for a moment, a subtle unease tickling the back of my mind. But the comfort of friends and the familiar surroundings quickly dismissed any fleeting concerns. As the fire crackled to life, casting flickering shadows that danced across our faces, we settled into an easy camaraderie, the kind that only comes with knowing people your whole life. About 20 minutes in, my dog Bo, a sprightly Bichon Frise, trotted over to the side yard. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it. The other gate was closed, and he couldn't go far. That's when I heard it, a scratching, scrabbling sound coming from the side yard without a gate, the one where we stored old bikes and forgotten toys. It was subtle, easy to dismiss as the wind or some small animal, but something about it caught my attention. I stood up, my phone's flashlight piercing the darkness as I walked towards the sound. "Where are you going?" Maddie called after me, a hint of nervous laughter in her voice. I didn't answer. My focus narrowed to the beam of light leading me forward. As I rounded the corner, the noise stopped abruptly. I swept the light across the yard. Nothing. No sign of anything amiss, just the quiet night and the slight rustle of leaves, chalking it up to a raccoon or some other small creature. I turned back to rejoin my friends, the tension easing from my shoulders. But it was then that Bo came trotting back from the other side yard, something white and crimson in his mouth. It was a tissue, soaked in what looked unmistakably like blood. The sight of it sent a jolt of fear through me, freezing me in place for a heartbeat. "It's probably nothing," Michael said when I showed them, trying to sound convincing. "Maybe someone had a nosebleed." We tried to laugh it off, returning to our seats by the fire, but the mood had shifted palpably. The lightness was gone, replaced by a taut string of tension that none of us could quite ignore. Then, as we sat there, trying to salvage the night, I noticed the light in my brother's room flick on. My brother had left for college weeks ago, his room untouched since. He didn't have a car, and he certainly wasn't supposed to be home. A cold prickle of fear ran down my spine as I stared up at the window, the curtain shifting slightly as if someone was watching. "What's that?" Alex's voice trembled slightly, his eyes fixed on something beyond the fence, his face drained of color. "What did you see?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, man. Something's out there," he replied, his eyes wide with fear. We extinguished the fire in a hurry, the comfort of the indoors suddenly appealing. As we huddled inside, closing windows and drawing curtains, the atmosphere was charged with a palpable sense of dread. We decided to distract ourselves with a movie, anything to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over us. But the night was far from over. As Maddie got up to use the bathroom, a scream shattered the temporary calm. She burst back into the living room, her face ghostly pale. "I saw something, someone running past the window," she gasped, her eyes wild with fear. That was the last straw. One by one, my friends decided it was time to leave, the night no longer holding any promise of fun or relaxation. Left alone, I tried to sleep, but it was futile. Around 2:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of Pepper, my other dog, barking furiously downstairs, her barks sounding almost human in their intensity. Tentatively, I peeked from my bedroom, the hallway stretching ominously before me. There was Pepper, halfway down the stairs, barking ferociously at the top where Bo sat quietly, staring into the darkness. The next morning, still shaken, I mentioned the night's events to my dad. He admitted hearing the unsettling barks too, and confessed they had freaked him out enough to stay put in his room. Now, as I reflect on the night, with a message from Alex on my phone pondering if it wasn't someone, but something, haunting our peaceful neighborhood, I'm left wondering what truths lurk in the shadows we so easily ignore. What if the darkness holds more than just fear, but a deeper, more sinister truth waiting to be uncovered? As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the events of the night, the normalcy of a Saturday morning seemed almost absurd. The contrast was stark. Birds chirped cheerfully and sunlight streamed through the windows, brushing away the shadows that had harbored our fears. Yet, the echoes of the night's terror lingered, a silent undercurrent to the day's tranquility. The morning was spent in a haze of reflection and subdued conversation. My dad, a pragmatic man, suggested maybe it was time to install some security cameras around the house. "Better safe than sorry," he muttered as he sipped his coffee, his gaze lingering on the yard where last night's fears had played out. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease as I replayed the events in my mind. The open gate, the mysterious scratching, the bloody tissue, and most unnervingly, the unexplained presence in my brother's room. Each element alone was enough to unsettle, but together, they wove a tapestry of fear that was hard to dismiss as mere coincidence. Mid-morning, I received a text from Alex. He was still shaken, his words tinged with the adrenaline of last night's fear. "Do you think it could have been something supernatural?" he texted. "Something about last night didn't feel right, like we weren't alone." The idea was chilling. Was it possible that what we experienced was something beyond the ordinary? A chill ran down my spine as I considered the possibility. Our neighborhood, peaceful as it appeared, might harbor secrets beneath its serene facade, secrets that perhaps were better left undiscovered. Determined to find some answers, I decided to do a bit more investigation. I called Maddie and Michael, proposing a daylight exploration of the areas that had frightened us the night before. Maddie hesitated, the fear still fresh in her mind. But Michael agreed, curiosity edging out his reservations. Armed with daylight and bolstered by Michael's presence, we started with the backyard. The gate was still slightly ajar, just as it had been. We ventured further to the spot where I had heard the scratching noises. With cautious steps and heightened senses, we examined the area. There was nothing out of place, no signs of disturbance in the soft earth around the old bikes and toys. It was as if the night had swallowed whatever had been there. Next, we checked the side yard where Bo had found the bloody tissue. My heart pounded as we approached, half expecting to uncover some grisly clue. But again, there was nothing. Just the mundane reality of an ordinary yard, the sinister impressions of the night before seemingly washed away by the light of day. Frustrated and with more questions than answers, we decided to check the windows around my brother's room. The curtains were still, the window locked from the inside as it should be. The normalcy was unsettling, the stark difference from the night's terror making it all seem like a bad dream. As we stood there, pondering our next steps, I noticed something at the corner of the window, a small, barely perceptible mark. Leaning closer, I realized it was a faint handprint, as if someone had pressed their palm against the glass from outside. The realization sent a fresh wave of chills through me. This was proof. Something or someone had indeed been there. "We need to talk to the police again," I said to Michael, my voice firm despite the trembling I felt. "There's something going on here, and we need to find out what." That afternoon, we filed a more detailed report with the local police. They promised to increase patrols in the area and to keep an eye out for any unusual activity. They took the bloody tissue for analysis, though I doubted it would lead to anything concrete. As the day faded into evening, the normalcy of our neighborhood felt like a mask over the lingering fear. I couldn't help but feel the eyes of unseen watchers, the weight of hidden stories pressing down upon us. That night, as I tried to sleep, every shadow seemed alive, every noise a whisper of hidden dangers. The boundaries between the known and the unknown had blurred, leaving us adrift in a sea of half-glimpsed fears and unspoken warnings. The question of whether it was someone or something out there remained unanswered, but one thing was clear. The shadows at sunset were deeper than we had ever imagined, and we were right to fear what lay within them. There's a certain charm in hearing stories from my grandpa, especially those woven with the quiet rhythms of rural life where he spent so many years. He lives a couple of hours away on a small farm in central Pennsylvania, a place where time seems to slow down and the modern world feels just a bit more distant. He shares this pastoral retreat with Marianne, his wife of 15 years, and up until recently, a spirited Boston Terrier named Bella. Bella was more than just a pet. She was a connection to a past friend of my grandpa, a buddy from his army days who had passed away many years ago. Naming her was his way of honoring that lost friendship. In their daily routine, Marianne would take Bella out in the fresh blush of morning, and Grandpa would take the evening stroll, just as the sun began to tuck itself behind the rolling hills, casting long shadows and painting the sky in strokes of orange and pink. One evening, not too long ago, Grandpa was out on his usual walk with Bella. He recounted this with a vividness that made it feel like I was right there beside him. They followed a dirt path that skirted the dense woods bordering their property, a path well trodden by their daily sojourns, but still holding the mystery of the wild unkempt. It was during one of these sunset walks that something unsettling occurred, something that reminded him that tranquility can sometimes be a fragile veneer. As they walked, the quiet was punctuated only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the soft pad of Bella's paws on the dirt path. The woods seemed to lean in a little closer as the light faded, and it was around this time that they encountered a stranger. This was unusual but not unheard of. The path was known to a few other locals. However, something about this stranger felt different. He was wearing a large hood, obscuring most of his face, and as they approached each other, Bella reacted strongly. She barked and pulled toward him, an instinctive response to something unfamiliar or unsettling. Grandpa, maintaining the cordiality of a seasoned country gentleman, greeted the stranger with a friendly nod and a good evening. But the man didn't respond. He just walked past, head down, lost in his own world. Normally, Grandpa would shrug off such behavior. People have their off days, after all. But Bella wasn't so easily calmed. She kept twisting her head back to bark at the man, her body tense and alert. Trying to soothe her, Grandpa tugged gently at the leash, murmuring for her to be quiet, to keep moving. But her anxiety was infectious, and soon, he too couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Every few steps, he glanced back, his unease growing with each turn. That's when he saw it. A glimpse of the stranger, half hidden behind a tree, watching them. The sight sent a cold shiver down his spine. He wasn't just being overly cautious. The stranger was indeed following them, moving from tree to tree, a silent predator in the dimming light. Trusting his instincts, Grandpa quickened his pace, his heart pounding not just from the brisk walk, but also from a rising tide of fear. Bella seemed to sense his urgency, her barks becoming more frantic. Grandpa has always believed in being prepared, a lesson from his army days that he carried into his twilight years. His hand slipped into his coat pocket, wrapping around the pepper spray he always carried. The comforting shape of the canister offered a small reassurance against the growing dread. They were nearing the house, the safety of home just a stone's throw away when suddenly, the soft clicks of footsteps sounded alarmingly close behind him. Before he could react, he felt the cold press of a gloved hand over his mouth, stifling his breath and muffling his shock. Panic surged through him, his fingers grappling for the pepper spray. Bella's barks turned to growls and snaps, her small body hurling itself at the legs of the attacker, biting at the stranger's ankles. The distraction gave Grandpa the split second he needed. His hand clenched the pepper spray, pulling it free. Twisting as much as he could, he managed to aim the spray at the shadow looming over him. He pressed down, unleashing a fiery stream of the chemical. Once, twice, 10 times. Floods of it, even as the grip loosened and the stranger stumbled back, howling in pain. With every ounce of strength left in his aged legs, Grandpa ran. He didn't look back until he was slamming the front door behind him, leaning against it, gasping for breath, safe but shaken. Inside the safety of his home, Grandpa stood for a moment, back pressed against the door, his chest heaving with heavy breaths. The adrenaline that had surged through his veins was now giving way to a trembling realization of just how close he had come to real danger. Bella, still on high alert, paced back and forth, occasionally letting out a soft whine or a tentative bark, as if to confirm the threat had indeed been neutralized. Grandpa looked down at the loyal little Boston Terrier, her fur slightly bristled, her body language still defensive. He knelt down, his old knees protesting slightly, and wrapped his arms around her. "Good girl, Bella," he murmured, his voice thick with gratitude. She had been more than just a companion. Tonight, she had been his protector. At 23, fresh out of a tumultuous relationship that had left its scars, I found myself grappling with a loneliness that felt as heavy as the evening sky. My apartment, once a shared space filled with the promise of US, now echoed with the starkness of me. Nights were the hardest, each one a reminder of the void that my ex had left behind. It was in this mental fog that I found myself on a chilly Friday evening, bundled up and tagging along with friends to a hockey game. They were the kind of friends who knew when you needed a night out without needing to ask. The game was an attempt to pull me from the shadows of my breakup, to immerse me in the electric thrill of crowds, cold beer, and the clamor of the rink. As the game progressed, so did the rounds of drinks. The arena was alive with the roar of fans and the chill of the ice. a stark contrast to the warmth of the alcohol buzzing through my veins. In a state somewhere between exhilaration and numbing relief, I found myself swept up in the moment, the weight of the past weeks momentarily lifted. Post-game, the crowd spilled into the arena's bar, a hub of high spirits and clinking glasses. The line for drinks was long, a winding snake of jerseys and flushed faces. It was here, amid the jovial chaos, that I struck up a conversation with a couple of guys standing next to me. They were friendly, the kind of easy camaraderie that comes with shared excitement from a game. One of them, with a quick smile and an easier laugh, asked for my phone number. Under the haze of alcohol and the night's high, I handed it over without a second thought. As the night wound down, my friends and I decided to call it. We parted ways outside the bar, and in a decision I'd come to regret, I chose not to head home but to text the man I'd just met. The buzz of my phone signaled his quick reply, an offer to meet up and head to his place. In a mix of spontaneity and impaired judgment, I agreed. The drive was a blur of streetlights and shadows, stretching longer than I had anticipated. We were on the road for what seemed like forever, leaving the city's glowing skyline far behind. When we finally stopped, the place he called home stood ominously quiet, almost swallowed by the darkness of its rural surroundings. The building had the look of long neglect, its silhouette jagged against the night sky, more akin to a forgotten warehouse than a home. Yet, inside, the stark contrast was disarming. The interior was meticulously clean, almost surgically so, with a sharp smell of disinfectant that hung heavily in the air. Before I could process the setting further, he poured us glasses of red wine, the rich aroma filling the space between us. My last clear memory was the taste of the wine, deep and smooth, before the night slipped away into darkness. Waking up the next morning, the room was too bright, too quiet. The only sound was the distant noise of a shower running somewhere in the background. As reality set in, a cold wave of panic washed over me. The details of the night before were foggy, snippets of memories that made little sense. I needed to leave, and fast. Scrambling to find my belongings, I felt a rising tide of dread. My phone, clothes, and wallet were nowhere in sight. With each passing second, my desperation grew. I rushed from the bedroom, only to stop dead in my tracks. The living room, stark and bare the night before, was now a scene straight out of a nightmare. Every surface was covered with plastic shower curtains, the floors, the furniture, all meticulously lined. My belongings were neatly arranged on the kitchen counter. Next to them, a hunting knife laid bare, its intent unclear but ominously present. Adrenaline took over. I grabbed my things, not stopping to question, to think, to breathe. I ran. The door, the road, the fields, it all blurred into a tapestry of fear. When I finally paused, lungs burning and heart pounding, I called a friend, my voice shaking as I begged them to come get me. That morning, I escaped a situation too dire to fully comprehend. The haunting question of what might have happened lingered heavily in my mind, a shadow that no amount of light could quite erase. The ride back to my apartment was a silent one, punctuated only by the occasional tremble in my hands and the ragged breaths that I struggled to steady. My friend, sensing the gravity of the situation, didn't press for details during the drive. Instead, she offered the comforting presence of someone familiar, a safe harbor after the storm I'd narrowly escaped. Once inside my apartment, the walls that had once felt too empty now offered a cocoon of safety. However, the sanctuary of home couldn't immediately erase the haunting images from my mind. The plastic-covered furniture, the sinister gleam of the hunting knife, and the chilling orderliness of a place that had briefly become a potential trap. In the following days, I wrestled with a torrent of emotions: fear, relief, anger, and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. The what-ifs plagued me, each scenario darker and more terrifying than the last. The reality that I had been moments away from possibly becoming a statistic was a hard pill to swallow. My sleep was fitful, interrupted by nightmares that replayed the night's events with various horrific endings. Amidst the turmoil of my emotions, I was gripped by a profound regret for not contacting the authorities. At the time, my only thought had been to escape, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the place where I had felt my life hang in the balance. The clarity that hindsight offered was a cruel companion, whispering reminders of missed opportunities to prevent future harm that this man might cause. The most disturbing realization came days later when I noticed the absence of my ID from the items I had hastily gathered before fleeing. This detail sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. What was his plan with my ID? The theft of such a personal item hinted at intentions that went beyond mere physical harm. It suggested a premeditation that was chillingly strategic.